Okay, we are continuing in the segments that we're doing about Intro to Kabbalah, and now today we're going to talk about how enlightenment becomes the light itself, and through that, the revelation of the will of God. So we all know that the moon reflects the light in which it receives from the sun. Okay, that is known to all. In other words, the sun is the source of the light, and the moon is the lightment of the sun itself, which is all true if we are comparing the moon to the sun. However, sometimes a person uses the light of the moon as the source of light itself. For example, if I'm going to take a mirror and I'm going to direct that mirror to the moon will reflect its light on the mirror, and therefore, in comparison to the light that comes from the mirror itself, because the mirror would reflect some light, the moon is the source of the light. Okay, so think about it this way. So if we're going to take, for example, let's take another scenario, another case. You have a rabbi who teaches his talmid, his student, and he projects to him wisdom. So therefore, he is considered to be the source of his intellect or his knowledge in which the student is receiving. And the student, in comparison to the rabbi, is considered to be the one who received that education, right? He is the receiver. However, if that talmid, if that student becomes a teacher and he teaches another talmid, another student, therefore he turns up from a receiving of the light to the source of the light, and so on and so forth. That is why it's important for us to always acknowledge the Sharsheret Kabbalah, the chain of unbroken chain of rabbinical handout, in terms of like this rabbi learned from this one, and this one got from this one, all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu and all the way to our days. In Kabbalistic terminology, that in intellect, which was that came from the Rab, is the source of enlightenment, right? That is the source of the light in comparison to his student. Now it's all in relation to who. That's why it's important to go over and to understand what we call again as Sharsheret Kabbalah. Is Moshe received it from God, which was the first luminary, right? And Moshe gave it to Yeshua, Yeshua gave it, and so on and so forth, all the way to the ways today. So therefore, the rabbi is the source of the light in comparison to his talmid, and that Torah that came from the rabbi to the talmid, that talmid becomes the source of light when he becomes a rabbi, when he decides to give. So if you looking about the progression and the development of a person, that's why it's very important, the modul elamed, to be able to turn from a receiving subject to a giving object, right? You are the receiver, and now you turn on to become that. So therefore, in a way, that when we could understand, when we say, we're going to make a man in our image, it reflects to the idea that man has the ability to share good with other people just as much as God shares good in his world with his creation, with his people. And it's very important to understand. And that's the main difference between Torah and many other subjects. The whole goal of Torah, of learning Torah, is to be able to hand it down to other people so they could also, in their turn, become givers and not only receivers. Okay, so it's all depends how we're going. So if we are talking about spiritual enlightenment, spiritual light, which is the spreading out or the expansion of God's will, that comes from a very high level spiritual realm, that source received that light from a higher level, right? And this is how we go up. We ascend ourselves up by recognizing those stages and those sources. And that source is the source of all sources, right? The King of all kings, the God of all gods, which is God Himself. Everything comes from Him. And, and in Kabbalah, we call it the source of all wills. In Kabbalistic terms, in Aramaic words, they call Re'avin, the will of all wills. And that is the root and the source for all reality itself. The will of God is the source of all reality itself, everything that we have. And from it, it goes down all levels, to all levels of enlightenment and revelation, goes all the way down from that. It does not skip, it has to go down. It has to be in a level of student to rabbi. You can't go and break it. That's why in Judaism we are very much concerned with who said that, to quote things in somebody's name, to make sure that it has a reliable source and it's not a new invention of a new idea that has no source and no continuation of enlightenment from its upper source. That's why it's important to say things in the names of whoever said it and so on and so forth. Otherwise, you're creating a new religion, a new faith, and we cannot do that because that's not going to have the ability to light and to hand over. You are not going to be able to become a giving vessel because there is nowhere to give. It's disconnected from its source. That's why it's important to connect yourself to God. That's why the Torah refers to changing your faith from a Jew to anything else as a true betrayal of God, because you are disconnecting yourself from the source. That's why a Jew is always a Jew. You know, you could become Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever you want to. However, once a Jew, always a Jew. You can't go back on that. There's no such thing. In order for a Jew to completely eliminate itself from its source, he needs to die. That's why a person that in his action cause a disconnect from its source, we say, you know, we said Shiva on him, right? A person that married out of faith and so on and so forth. We said Shiva on him. In other words, so therefore, going back to what we're saying, the will of all wills, that is the source of all reality, and from that, all enlightenments and all realization and all realities really come from. In other words, that will really spreads from Ein Sof, and it's being revealed one revelation at the time, one step at the time, you know, going up or going down, depends on where you are standing, as much as the wisdom of the Rav, right, the rabbi, the teacher, is being revealed stage by stage from one Talmud, which is a high level, right? You can have a Talmud that is on a high level to a Talmud that is a lower level. The wisdom of the rabbi is being revealed based on the vessel, which is the student which receives. So a rabbi can, if a rabbi has only high quality students or has lower quality students, his wisdom is going to be reflected only in one way. However, if a rabbi has a student who is brilliant, it doesn't mean that the rabbi cannot, the greatness of the rabbi is that he will be able to teach even students on a lower level. And his chokhmah and his wisdom is going to be reflected based on the vessel, based on the Talmud. It doesn't mean that a rabbi that teaches only lower level students is incapable of teaching students of high levels and the other way around. If so, he is not a good source. So the same thing here, the itpashtut, the spreading out of the divine will by the sferot is want to tell us, in other words, that the sferot themselves, Keta, Chokhmah, Binah, and so on and so forth, is a revelation of the divine will in different aspects. Sometimes it's been revealed in Chesed, sometimes it's been in Din, and sometimes in this Sphera, and so on and so forth. When David HaMelech wants to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he wants to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says the following, Shlach orcha v'amitecha hema yenachamuni, right? Send your light, and so on and so forth, and that's what should give me comfort. And also it says, Ki amcha mekor chayim be'orcha nira'o. Your nation is a source of light of life in your light, and only in your light, that's where we could see the light. In other words, not in all the other lights. That's why for a Jew, we cannot see the light following other quote unquote gods. Because you are the God. That's your light. That's how we seek life. Now, if we're going to try to conclude that, we say that spiritual enlightenment is the revelation of the God, of God's will. So if a person is enlightened, it means that he is able to identify God's will in every aspect of his life. And the greater the enlightenment that a person is exposed to, or is in a state, is basically his understanding, a better understanding of what God wants from us, from him, and so on and so forth. That's what enlightenment is being determined. Not like this great wisdom to give you quotes for troubled time, like some guru says, and so on and so forth. What does God want from me? That's and how clear I get it, that's what determines how enlightened I am. That spreading of his will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way it spreads out and reveals in the world, and not only that, there is a meaning in enlightenment itself also, and the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals his will, and these are the actions that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. And if a person understands that, he understands why this happens in the world, why that happens in the world, and so on and so forth. That's why we always use the words of light and enlightenment and so on and so forth. That's why it's very common to use it in Kabbalah. Now, we need to be very careful with this, because many times we use concepts that are very common in other practices and other, faiths and so on and so forth. However, it is most of the times far with what Judaism is referring to when we're talking about enlightenment and understanding and God's light and so on and so forth. In other words, as I said to you before, it's how much you understand what God wants from you and how much God wants from us and how much God wants from the world. That's what it is all about. And a person needs to really work on that and to really understand how to achieve that. And beyond the understanding is also how much are you willing to execute God's will. To that matter, maybe somebody could say ignorance is a bliss, like I don't know, so therefore you can't hold me responsible, but you will hold responsible. Why didn't you try to achieve that? That's why God could never be a person or an item, because all those things are being creations. They're not the creator. We are just vessels in which we interpret God's light that comes to us. And therefore, our job will really be to cleanse that vessel as much as we can to do God's will. And that requires a lot of work. That requires a lot of contemplation and what work is all about and so on and so forth. And what's the spiritual work? Not everybody is willing to do that. That means that throwing away a lot of what we get used to as determined as important in life. There's among the Iraqi Jews, there's an expression that they say that a rooster is being led to slaughter and all it cares about is about eating, right? What it cares about is small, earthy urges and needs and so on and so forth, nothing like something bigger. Hey, you're being led to slaughter, right? So we need to understand, especially in times like we have now, what does God want from us? And some say, well, you're not on that level. If I'm not on that level, it's wrong to say it. It's wrong to say I'm not at that level to understand based on how God is hitting me for the tikkun, for what I need to fix. That is wrong to say. And I'll tell you why. Because it's what we explain right now. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does something in the world, and each one to his level that is at understands that in one way or another. So therefore, within God's interaction in the world, there is a personal message to all of us to whichever level we are at. And to say I'm not at that level let's say, for example, there is, I don't know, coronavirus argument, right? So I would play very humble with you and I would say, well, I'm not at that level to really know what God wants from me to that message. That is wrong to say. If that's the answer, is therefore I don't know what it is all about, and there's nothing I can do about it. So let me continue in what I'm doing. And that beats the point of the whole message, of the whole God's interaction. Each one to his own level. And his own level, again, as I said to you, is not necessarily determined by how much you know and how much you could regurgitate, more of how sensitive you are. We're talking about totally different levels now. Of course, a person that learned Torah and haven't yet changed himself is going to suffer more from that because he is expected to do more and to be more spiritual. But nevertheless, it's that. So these are stages of development. And you are required to, because Kiyuma mitzvot, establishing the mitzvot, is determining our ability to be able to turn all the time from receivers to givers. And then we go again. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us and he elevates us. And when we go up to the next level, we are receivers. And then until the cup is being, or the vessel is being filled again, and then we can pour from that level and so on and so forth. And that's what we need to do. Our goal should not be, let me do what I want, is let me do what God wants me to do. And that is a spiritual work. Tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to start talking about senses and sechel and intellect and so on and so forth, and the source of understanding in terms of how does that correspond, the conflict between intellect and neshama in our soul, how does it come to play to play a goal in our life. To that matter, again, I would like to thank everybody that joined us today and all our supporters, both in physical and spiritual means. And I really hope that soon we'll be able to all see and understand what God wants from us. So far, but I have a safe day, and please join us again tonight at 8 o'clock for Gemara Shiur.